Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the channel, and we're going to continue from the last live stream that we did, which was all about the current situation in Iran, specifically with the protesters and the civil disobedience and revolution which is happening in Iran. So tonight's going to be a continuation of that, and we're actually going to be talking more about battle plans, actually, and the order of battle between the main belligerents, the IRGC on the Iranian side, the United States. So quite a lot has happened in the last couple of days in regards to build-up of troops and tensions escalating in the region. We all know from the last live stream that the IRGC are the ruling government of Iran at the moment, which hopefully is due to change very, very soon. It's a mix of what we said last time, because this all started really from the civil disobedience that was happening in Iran between everyday Iranians going onto the streets and protesting for the downfall and the removal of the IRGC, and Ali Khameini, the Ayatollah, has escalated now into an international affair. We discussed last time that Israel have now openly said that they're now getting involved, or they are actively involved in trying to overthrow the IRGC. The USA has been drawn into it as well, predominantly with Donald Trump saying that if the IRGC were to open fire on Iranian protesters, he was going to take action. Now, the thing is with Trump is that he's a very, very unpredictable guy. So in terms of real politics and power play, one has to kind of take what he says seriously. Even if you don't necessarily have to take the guy seriously, a lot of the time you actually have to take what he says seriously, because as we saw what happened in Venezuela, Trump came along and he actually removed a head of state in what could only be described as some James Bond kind of movie-esque kind of way. Very, very very surreal. I don't feel as though anybody really saw that coming in the international community. He's obviously made noises about Greenland. So what happened in Venezuela, Trump was basically saying, look, if I say I'm going to do something, you better take it seriously. Trump saying he's going to take action against the IRGC if they open fire on Iranian civilians in the street. As we discussed ad nauseum in the last live stream, the IRGC have committed human rights abuses against the Iranian people themselves. We did discuss that quite in depth the last live stream. With all due respect, I did find quite a lot of the statistics actually quite traumatic. I wasn't aware of actually how high they were. And after the live stream, and a couple of days after that, I did go and do more research about the deaths, and I feel that mainstream media is now being a little bit more accurate about how many people have actually been killed, and not just killed in the protest, but they've actually been executed by various different means and ways. So it's never nice when you have to deal with death. So, you know, genuinely, my condolences really do go out to those who have lost their lives, and especially to the families who are having to now live through the grieving process. But the IRGC doing that brought Trump into the mix. And now people are saying, well, you did this thing with Venezuela. You're making noises about Greenland. Are you going to live up to your promise of saying, if the IRGC kill their own people, are you going to get involved? And what we're seeing over the last week is very much that Trump is suggesting that he would get involved. The evidence is suggesting that Trump will get involved. Hey, Ben, Delta Force really earned its paycheck. Yes, yeah. Yes, they did, I suppose so. Nobody talks about Maduro anymore, though. He's kind of like last month's news. And you don't see people now going around saying, oh, you know, free Maduro. He was the democratically elected leader of Venezuela, and all that entails. We don't go around with Venezuelan flags anymore. Venezuela's last month. Nobody talks about Venezuela anymore. Nobody talks about Maduro anymore. Actually, a lot of left-wing academia is not actually even talking about Iran. As horrible as the situation is in Iran, There are, I believe, some reasons behind that. I believe that a lot of like the left-wing establishments don't want to talk about Iran because, cutting a long story short, and I don't want to diverge too much from off topic, but if they were to voice a dissent against the IRGC, that would basically collapse their narrative, because the IRGC have the pulse strings over certain splinter cells, such as Hezbollah, which is a fact. It's not speculation, it is a fact. The IRGC have funding Hezbollah. They have indirect and direct links to Hamas and various other groups around the region, Islamic Jihad. Wouldn't surprise me if they had connections with Boko Haram and places and people like this as well. Houthis in Yemen, very much sponsored directly, indirectly by the IRGC. So if the pro-Palestine, pro-Gaza left-wing posse were to basically condemn IRGC, they just, by association, they'd be condemning their own cause, essentially. So much going on. Yeah, there is a lot going on, actually, and that's actually about tonight's live stream, because in this day and age, and like the last week, a week ago when I did the live stream about what was happening in Iran, so much has happened during that week that almost, I wouldn't say what I did the live stream about last week is now irrelevant, because it still is very much relevant. But times move fast, and I wanted to actually make a live stream about this because I was watching something the other day actually about the whole deployment and Trump's actions and the IRGC's reaction and vice versa. I thought so much is happening. This needs to be covered, and I spoke about it quite a bit at the last live stream, Ben. But you know my connections to the Middle East. You know my cultural heritage. I spent my childhood in the Middle East as well, which was very, very, had to be kind of quite under the carpet, because culturally Jewish. I was living in an Islamic country. As a matter of fact, there's actually only 2 countries. Yeah, I believe there's only 2 countries in the Gulf that have synagogues. One is the UAE, and that was only recently. The other is Bahrain, which is my future home. Yeah, I live a very, very strange kind of lifestyle. Sorry, ignore it. In the quads. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you said please ignore that, because otherwise I wouldn't I wouldn't know what you're referring to then. Quads, quad bike, quads and the legs. I did do some quad exercises today, actually. So right, let us go through our battle order for today and actually see where people are at. This is, as far as I'm aware, at the time of me doing research for this, which was earlier today, what I'm about to read is relevant. And if things are, what I'm saying is not accurate anymore, then I do apologize, but it was accurate at the time when I was doing this research. Non-alcoholic, by the way, Ben. I don't know what you're drinking. Have one for me. Oh, whoa. Okay, no, I thought it was going to froth over. So the main strategy of the states at the moment, and at the time research, was that they were sending a US warship to the Gulf, which is the USS Abraham Lincoln, codenames Charlie Violet Nebraska 72. It's a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. Home port is San Diego in California, and it was commissioned actually or launched in 1988. So it's quite an old aircraft carrier, and yet it's still in service, which must go to show something about the actual ship itself. It must be still very much battle worthy for it to still be commissioned and still doing operations. Otherwise, the US Navy would have sent something a bit more modern. So obviously the US states have faith in it being able to do its job, or at least put an imposing presence in the region. So the USS Lincoln is, as far as we know, it's in the Middle East region. And I did literally before coming onto the live stream, I did actually type in to Google, like trying to find out where it was. And all it said was literally all the sources I looked at were literally just said it's in the region. I will share my screen. I mean, sometimes when I do share my screen, I know that the internet goes really, really weird on my side. And I didn't share my screen last live stream. I had a few things I wanted to show. I didn't share it for that very reason. But I'm going to risk this one, and I'm going to show where where speculation is, and this is just speculation. So bear with. Where's my share screen? Share screen. Here we go. That could well have changed. No, the internet's down. See, this is why I try not to share my screen. I don't think I'll share my screen anymore, actually, if it's going to do that. Please do let me know if the net is back in. Let me just get rid of these. A lot of pop-ups have suddenly come up on my screen, so let me get rid of that. Okay, if it's gone back to normal, please do let me know. If not, I'll just have to come out and go back in, I suppose. Fresh. All good. Cool. Okay. Lesson learned. I'm not going to share my screen again. But hopefully, well, what I tried to show from there, I basically showed just a map of the Persian Gulf. I showed a map of the Gulf of Oman and a little bit of the Arabian Sea. Now, the Persian Gulf goes into the Gulf of Oman. The Gulf of Oman goes into the Arabian Sea, which is part of a bigger body of water, which is the Indian Ocean. And speculation was that the USS Abraham is actually just off the coast of Muscat, and Muscat is on the Gulf of Oman. It's literally kind of, you get the Indian Ocean or the Arabian Sea here, Oman's here, Gulf of Oman's up here, and it's literally this tiny corner here where I think the USS Abraham is. And I know my fingers are not a good substitute for maps, but you know, I'm not having that thing disconnect me again. But that was a speculation of where it is. Where people know for sure is still nobody knows, except people actually on board that ship, except the US Admiralty. Interestingly, latest report from US intelligence was actually that an Iranian drone, a Shahad drone, went down towards the Gulf of Oman, towards Muscat. US were alerted to this, and they sent off their own drone from Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, which went into the Persian Gulf, then cut across the Persian Gulf into the Gulf of Oman, presumably trying to find this Iranian drone. So one can speculate then that this Iranian drone was trying to find where the USS Lincoln was, and this US drone was then sent up to either counter reconnaissance this Iranian drone to see what it was doing, or perhaps it had capabilities so we can shoot it down. By all accounts, the Iranian drone couldn't find anything, so it went back to Iran, and the US drone then was recalled because it couldn't find the Iranian drone itself, or it realized that the Iranian drone was going back to Iran and posed no threat. Looking on my sat nav, yeah, I mean, it's all labeled on maps and stuff like that. I'm sure you could find it quite easy enough. In terms of drones, on the US side, the US actually, the last time I did research earlier today, the US have drones up and down the Persian Gulf. They had a drone which was, it was over Bahrain, and the US do have bases in Bahrain. The main US base in Bahrain is actually, it's a naval base. It's the US Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, and this drone came up from Bahrain, and it actually sped towards Kuwait, which is the opposite direction of Oman. The US do have bases in Kuwait as well, so what that drone was doing up there, I think it, again, speculation, wants to keep eyes on perhaps Iranian shipping further up the Gulf. There was US drones over the UAE as well. And again, the US do have an airbase in the UAE, Al Dhafra. It's the US 380th AEW from Abu Dhabi. And there was also US drones over Qatar. And that shouldn't come as a surprise as well, actually, because the US do have bases in Qatar. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. So the states have the UAE, they have Qatar, they have Bahrain, and they have Kuwait. I forgot to mention actually as well, the US Air Base in Kuwait is Ali Al Salem. So all the expat-friendly countries of the Gulf have US bases in them. So the US can communicate quite easily between, say, the Emirates on one side of the Gulf and Kuwait right at the other via drone usage. Of course, what are these drones looking out for? Iranian shipping. They're looking for doing recon on Iranian ports. The main port in Iran, the naval port, is called Bandar Abbas, which is right on the crux between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Bandar Abbas is where the Iranian Navy is mostly based. And it's strategically placed because then they can actually keep eyes on what goes in and out of the Gulf. The Iranians also, not so much important these days, but they had another port called Bashir, which is further up the Gulf towards Kuwait. That lost relevance during the Iran-Iraq war during the 80s, because Iraq, it was close enough to Iraq for Iraq to strike it. So that's why the Iranians moved it from Bashir to Bandar Abbas, further south along the Gulf. But with the Americans now having bases in Kuwait, having bases in Bahrain, which are closer to Bashir, they can keep an eye on that. Whereas the drones now from Abu Dhabi and Doha in Qatar can now keep eyes on Bandar Abbas and the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Ben, I'm going to imagine a drone in Kafir and one in a MAGA hat, the original Gulf War. Yep. Yeah, you should see some memes about the drones. And yeah, the original Gulf War, 1980 to 1988, between Saddam Hussein, who was an ally of the West, ironically, and the Iranian regime. That war ended in stalemate tactically, but that's how Iraq got a lot of its westernized hardware, was because the West actually, and Thatcher actually said that she saw Saddam Hussein was somebody that she saw Britain doing business with. So the West gave a lot of its hardware to Iraq, believing Saddam to be a cool guy to fight against the Iranians, when they were both as bad as each other, essentially. The drones themselves, Iran use what's called Shahed drones. During research, they are quite naff. As you can imagine, from a country like Iran, they get a lot of their hardware from places like Russia and China. They try making their own stuff as well, using Chinese and Russian technology. It's quite advanced for the region, but in terms of like international warfare, it's not going to hold you really in good stead if you go muzzle to muzzle with a country like the United States. A friend of my primary school's dad died in Iran. I'm sorry to hear that. I thought it was very sad. Yeah. A lot of it. There were a lot of civilian casualties. The Iranians as well, ironically, and I'm saying this because it kind of ties into obviously what we're talking about Iran, but the Iranian tactics at that time, because the Iraqis had the more advanced technology, the Iranians delved into the fanaticism of a lot of their people, the superstition as well, the religious superstitions, and they basically forced their own people to be human shields and to basically try and overcome Iraqi positions by throwing human wave and human shield at the Iraqis. And a lot of these people were civilians, they weren't soldiers, but they were promised with martyrhood and that they'd go to heaven if they did this, and just got killed in their thousands. It's horrific. The Iran-Iraq war is horrific. I believe they used mustard gas. Both sides were guilty of using chemical weapons. That much is true. but I believe mustard gas was used as well, by either one side or both. It wouldn't surprise me if it was both, to be honest. Some incredibly bad stuff happened. Yeah, it certainly did. Certainly did. But speaking of military hardware, that's interesting actually, because we're now going to come on to, we've discussed about the Iranian drones and the Shaheeds that they have. The Iranian military is very much like any other military now. It's made up of armed forces. It's made up of army, land forces. It's made up of naval vessels, and it's made up of an air force as well. And it's quite insightful, I feel, about hearing about the Iranian Air Force, because you don't associate a country like Iran with an air force, but it has one. But the Iranian Air Force it's small, and it's a mix of some very strange planes. And I feel that this is kind of reflective of how Iran's allegiance have changed so much during the 20th century and beyond. For instance, I was surprised to learn that actually the Iranian Air Force had a small number of F-14 Tomcats, which are almost iconic United States warplanes. How did they get them? This must have been actually when during the Shah, before the Islamic Revolution in '79, when Iran was an ally to the United States. That's when the US must have given these F-14s to Iran, which would then highlight that these F-14s are very, very old, older than the USS Abraham Lincoln, which was launched in 1988. These Iranian F-14s must be ancient and operating pretty much on dust. Additionally, they have the Mirage, Dassault Mirage F1, which is a Dassault, or a French company. The Mirage is an iconic French fighter plane. That again, it raised a little bit of eyebrows. It's kind of like, well, how did you get hold of those? But then, conversely, when the original Ayatollah Khameini went into exile in Paris, France was supporting what was then meant to be the Ayatollah coming back to Iran. They were supporting the Islamic Revolution. So maybe the French government at the time then gave or gifted the Ayatollah with these French Dassault Mirages. That's the only thing I can think of. But again, that was a long time ago. It was in the 70s. So these Mirages must be absolute decrepit, almost skeletons. Not so surprisingly, Iran has a small fleet of MiG-29s. Now, MiGs are Russian aircrafts, MiG Fulcrums, heavy-duty kind of stuff. From what I understand, they're actually very, very capable aircraft. But the fact that they're actually from Russia, again, that must show that actually that is post-revolution. The Iranians have been cozying up to Russian governments for many, many years, and were obviously given these MiGs as a lease or a loan or a gift. So I'm not so surprised to see MiGs in the Iranian Air Force. And they also have a small squadron of what's called Chengdu J-7s, which are a small fighter aircraft, single-seaters from China. Again, showing where the allegiances and the alliances lie. Hardware from Russia, hardware from China, doesn't surprise. Maybe more, well, I'm sure it's more up to date than the F-14s and the Mirages, but still not stuff you'd really trust. I wouldn't want to jump into like one of those latter aircraft and go and fight somebody, because the maintenance of those Russian and Chinese stuff are not snuff. Sorry, I've been neglecting the chat. I read about one battle where the Iranian side tried to raid a power station of the Iraqis, somehow managed to route power into a river, so the Iranians attacking by boat were basically cooked alive. Jesus, that's horrible. They tried to land. As Bill Hicks said, we know we've got these weapons we kept for receipts. Yes. With that Iran-Iraq war, we keep going back to the Iran-Iraq war, but in Iraq, the closest city they have to the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, is Basra. And almost opposite, that's actually really close to the Iranian border. just over the border in Iran, the city which is closest to the Iraqi border is called Abadan. And basically, these cities were close enough to each other to basically shell each other to death. So Basra and Abadan basically got destroyed. Not sure really what happened to Abadan afterwards, the Iranian side, but Iraq tried to build up Basra, and then that got, destroyed in future conflicts. So that's the Iranian Air Force that we've discussed. In terms of their ships, they have a navy, but it's very, very small. I was surprised when I was doing research for this. I was surprised actually how small the Iranian navy was. And that, I feel, is reflective by actually the emphasis that the Iranians put on their drones or their long-distance missiles, which we'll come on to in a little bit. But the Iranian navy, bearing in mind how big the Persian Gulf is, bearing in mind how big the Gulf of Oman is, bearing in mind how crucial the Persian Gulf is, because you got the oil coming from Kuwait all the way down the Persian Gulf, passes the tiny crux, that entrepot of the Persian Gulf called the Strait of Hormuz, which is a strategic strangle point. Once you get through there, you go down the Gulf of Oman, into the Arabian Sea, as we said, into the Indian Ocean, and voila, the world's your oyster. You can go wherever. But considering how crucial control over the Persian Gulf is, the Iranian Navy is not going to be able to do a good job. They have, to date, 7 frigates, 5 corvettes, 19 submarines, 6 patrol boats, and a patrol boat could be anything. A dinghy could be a patrol boat, essentially. Apparently 31 amphibious boats, which again, that could be anything. That could be like a DUC landing craft. It could be a dinghy itself. Like the boats kind of that you see that landed at Normandy, those were amphibious crafts. It doesn't necessarily mean it's anything spectacular. Anything could be amphibious. 17 auxiliary ships, and again, auxiliary could mean anything. It could be a recon ship. It could be an oil tanker, a refueling ship. It could be a dhow, a traditional Persian and Arabic ship is called a dhow. It's made of wood. They're very, very fast, but they're useless to fight in. And they have 20 fast attack craft. And again, that could be anything. A speedboat could be an attack craft. So essentially, they have 7 frigates, 5 corvettes, 19 submarines, and all the rest, the patrol boats, the amphibious boats, the auxiliary ships, and the fast attack craft could be anything. But yeah, they could just be kayaks, for all we know. So that small force trying to patrol and police the Persian Gulf is not going to do a good job. And that is going up against the United States. That could very well change. Like I said, the things change so fast these days. And again, Iran could very well be IRGC could go to, say, China. They could go to Russia and say, look, could you hand us some hardware? That could upset the balance of power again. China and Russia could say, yeah, that's fine. And they could give them a whole load of other things. Mine layers. They could give them more advanced submarines, because I can imagine those submarines they have are probably not going to be that top notch. What interests me actually is that the Iranian Navy actually doesn't have any destroyers. But when I was doing research, I couldn't find any destroyers. Destroyers are generally the backbone of any navy. They are the attack craft, essentially. No cruisers, no, what would you call it, aircraft carriers. I don't actually think Iran would actually have the money to actually maintain and run an aircraft carrier, because from what I understand, they're extremely expensive. And aircraft carriers are, it's not something you can just get. They're such sophisticated pieces of hardware. And as I said, extremely expensive to run as well. And you've got a whole crew to maintain. You need a specialist crew on an aircraft carrier, because it's joint operation between Air Force and Navy. Whereas if you get something like what we said earlier, attack craft, or what was it? Amphibious boat. you know, if that's a speedboat, you don't need specialist training for that. So lastly, actually, we come on to the Iranian, I suppose, the main defense they have. They do have an army, which we haven't discussed that much. We spoke about the army quite a lot in the last live stream and all the different militant groups who are siding with the IRGC, and the IRGC are now calling in their proxies, your people like your Hezbollah, your Houthis, and what have you. They're calling them into Iran, and Iran are drawing a lot on their Basij militia as well, who are basically like the hired thugs that go around Iran and beat people up. They're calling on them. So they do have an army, but we don't hear that much from it. And I don't feel as though we will hear that much from it, because if you're going to be fighting with an army on the land, that's your last line of defense. You try to fight your opponent from a distance. And again, this kind of ties in, I think, a bit of Taekwondo philosophy kind of comes in here, because the reason why Taekwondo uses its legs is because you try to keep your opponent at that distance. You don't want them coming too close. If they're in too close, you know you're in a danger zone. You want to keep them at a distance. And that is pretty much true of any sort of military strategy. You want to fight your opponent from a distance. And that's why back in like Roman times, they developed javelins, so they could throw these weapons at their enemies as opposed to stab them in the face. Develop archery, longbows and stuff to kill your opponent from a distance. Firearms, kill them from a distance. Bombs, all this kind of stuff. So I feel as though we'll hear more from the actual army itself, army proper of Iran, if there was an invasion, because that would be Iran's last line of defense. But before it gets to that stage, Iran has one more trick: missiles. We'll talk about missiles. I'll read Ben's comments first, and I'll talk about missiles. You should look up the Millennium Challenge 2002. It's an amazing look at how isometric warfare could be devastating to a high-tech navy. Obviously, it's a bit outdated now. Quds Force. That's what I was thinking of earlier. But yes, it makes sense. Yes, yeah, for Quds. Yeah. They, yeah, I know what you mean now. That's cool. Trump took the leader out. A lot of leaders. Thing is, a lot of leaders from like Hamas and Hezbollah have been taken out in the recent Gaza war. People like Yahya Sinwar. I know he's Hamas. He's not Hezbollah, but he was taken out. Hassan Nasrallah was taken out as well. Back in 2020, one of the main generals from the IRGC was taken out. Soleimani, I believe it was, in January 2020, just before COVID. But Iran is using missiles, so let's talk about that. Iran's missiles are cruise missiles. These missiles can be launched from land into sea. The main ones that Iran have are called Shahab and Fatah. Both of them, I saw some footage actually the other day of of this Iranian propaganda TV of where they're actually like firing these rockets and taking these test run rockets, and they were just firing them out into the sea, into the Gulf, and taking this Iranian news reporter into these bunkers in Iran to show them these Fatah and these Shahab cruise missiles they have. And they were saying stuff like they've got a lot of range. And that I looked at and thought, okay, I will do some research on that myself. And when I did my research, yeah, apparently the reason they have so many of these missiles is because they have a very long range. They can reach right out into like the middle of the Persian Gulf. Where they fail is that they're highly inaccurate. And the further out they go, the more inaccurate they become. So they could see a US warship. They could see the USS Abraham Lincoln coming up the Gulf. As soon as it gets like the limit of the range, they could fire these missiles at the Lincoln. They're probably not even going to hit because they're so inaccurate. They're either going to land in the sea or they're just going to explode prematurely. Again, I feel that a lot of this like technology is from places like China and Russia again. And as we say, a lot of military hardware from China and Russia is just built in bulk. It's more a case of if we build more of it, it'll be more effective because we'll just overwhelm the opponent, as opposed to let's build a small amount of missiles, which are very, very accurate. That's quantitative over qualitative. But they have these missiles which they're firing out into the sea, or they will fire out into the sea at the approach of any like US warships. They have fired such rockets at Israel. And I remember earlier this year, middle of last year, when Israel started doing strikes against Iran, Iran were firing Shahabs and Fatahs into Israel. Most of them didn't actually hit Israel because Israel had the protective Iron Dome. So all these missiles heading towards Israel just got destroyed by Israel's Iron Dome and didn't cause much damage. The odd occasional one did get through, but for the most part, it was a failed counterattack by Iran. And they're still using these things to fire into, or they say they're going to fire them at the US. On this propaganda video, which I saw, and you saw these, I would share my screen, but the last time I shared my screen, it kind of fucked up. But on this propaganda video, somebody commented about the music that was playing on this propaganda video. And they said it was the soundtrack to the game Gears of War. So the IRGC, they made this weird PowerPoint movie editor kind of film about how great their missiles were. They couldn't even make up their own music. They had to use like some shitty ass computer game from like 20 odd years ago, as if we wouldn't know. So that is the Iranian side. That is the Iranian battle plan. Now, as we said, things change, and I've said that a lot. And if things were to escalate into a war, hopefully they don't, but if they were, and an invasion did land in Iran, then that order of battle, could very well change. Like I said, we'll start seeing the Iranian army, the IRGC itself. You'll start seeing all the proxies that Iran has been funding for years will then suddenly come out of the woodwork for the defense of the IRGC. Before we actually go on to like we have actually discussed the US battle plan, because at the moment, they, like I said about the USS Abraham Lincoln coming into the region, we still don't know where that is. But we mentioned about the Iranian bases, the US bases in the region. We mentioned that the US have bases in UAE, in Abu Dhabi, which was the Al Dhafra US 380th Air Wing. They have bases in Qatar, Al Ubaid Air Base. They have US bases in Bahrain, the US Fifth Fleet, the naval base. They've got bases in Kuwait. It's worth mentioning now, actually, about the alliance that the US are actually building up, and I feel will actually continue to build. What started as a domestic situation in Iran of Iranians protesting against the IRGC and wanting the overthrow of Ali Khamenei and the IRGC escalated into an international situation where the US got involved. The US were actually very busy about building a coalition of allies. The alliance at the moment is quite surprising, actually, who's actually in it. But the USA is spearheading it. Obviously, you get the Iranians in Iran itself. But with the US taking action as they are against Iran, there's a lot of Iranian Americans in the States who have actually now personally appealed to Trump via social media and TikToks, saying that they actually want Trump to formally send Iranians or Iranian Americans to Iran so they could actually fight boots on the ground, the IRGC, and help overthrow the IRGC from the inside. The video I saw of that, there's an Iranian American guy, actually, he was almost crying. He was almost pleading with Trump, saying, like, please send me and my fellow Iranian Americans to Iran so we can help overthrow. And he was saying that, he's a proud American, he wants to do that. What about Iraq? Surely that place owes them more. You mean like Iraq siding with the states? That would make, it would make sense if Iraq did side with the states. But I feel that I have to be honest, I'm not too clued up with actually what is happening in Iraq at the moment. Because I know after the war of 2003, the US imposed a pro-West, pro-US government. Obviously, that was almost like a puppet regime, so to speak. It was just to keep the American interests in Iraq, in that region. Since the US have pulled out, ISIS took over, then ISIS are apparently destroyed. That is debatable. Is ISIS an ideology at the heart of it? Is ISIS just a group of thugs? Maybe it's a bit of both. But I feel maybe with Iraq that there's been so much, I'd say, bitterness, probably towards the states of thinking like, look, you guys came into our country saying you're going to liberate, and you actually created a bigger mess. And I feel what a lot of Iraqis will probably actually say is that even though Saddam Hussein was a dictator, he imposed order. And there's always a thing as well of the West will always be the infidels. So they would, I feel that many Iraqis, even though they acknowledge that Saddam Hussein was a complete dictator and a horrible person, they would have sided with him because he was one of their own, which is, in my outlook, is actually quite naive, to be honest. But that's just different cultures, different outlooks. So I feel that Iraq is very much sore at this moment in time. Problem is, Trump only has limited time in office. That's why he's probably trying to do this when he can. But Trump has tried actually putting forth, I think it's, what's his son called? I heard he's trying to push his son to get involved in politics and for his son to become his successor for the Republicans. So he may try acting like continuing his policies via his son, which wouldn't surprise me. It sounds like a Trump thing to do. Barron, that's it. Yeah, thank you. Barron Trump. It wouldn't surprise me if Trump tried doing that. As we're saying, going back to this alliance. So the US is spearheading this alliance. The Iranian people on the floor as well can be considered part of that alliance too. Other allies of the US at the moment, Israel. Now, we said in the last live stream that Israel and Mossad have admitted that they are actually interfering with Iranian politics at the moment. And quite recently, actually, there was an infiltrator into the IRGC, which I believe had connections to Mossad. So Israel being involved doesn't surprise me. Israel is a very, very old friend of the United States. As a matter of fact, I'd say the relationship that Israel and the United States have is closer than what the US and the UK have at this moment in time. So it's no surprise that Israel are backing. And Israel have always seen Iran as a threat in that region anyway. And Iran has, again, continuously called Israel Little Satan. Ever since the revolution, Iran has called America Big Satan and Israel Little Satan. Former Iranian President Ahmadinejad said he wants to wipe Jews off the face of the earth, and he wants to wipe Israel. He wants to push Israel into the sea. That's where the horrible from the river to the sea comes from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. That's the whole. That's what that stupid from the river to the sea genocidal chant means. So Ahmadinejad, the Iranian former president, kept saying, we're going to push the Jews into the sea. Is it any wonder why Israel feels threatened by Iran? So they've sided with the United States. So the United States have themselves, they have the Iranian people, they have Israel. They also have Jordan. Now, this surprised me. I mean, Jordan, I know, is actually a very liberal country in the Middle East, more liberal than what people give it credit for. Jordan, I wouldn't see Jordan having much to actually gain from this. I mean, Jordan have friendlier relations with Israel than many other Arabic countries, but even so, I would expect Jordan to say, look, you know, this hasn't really got anything to do with us. We don't have that much connection with Iran, so I'm kind of surprised Jordan have joined in with this. And especially as well, I feel that actually Jordan siding with Israel against Iran that could easily have backfired onto Jordan. A lot of other Arabic countries could have looked at it and gone, you know what, you're siding with Israel, and we can't really oversee that. We'll see how that pans out. Another country, actually part of that alliance as well, is the UAE. Now, the UAE have said that they're actually taking a defensive stance, so they're not being an active belligerent. They're not being like the US. They're not sending their military hardware towards Iran. But what the UAE have said is that they'll act defensively. As we said earlier, the states do have bases in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi. And what the UAE have said is that if Iran tries attacking US personnel, or indeed the UAE itself, on UAE soil, the UAE will respond militarily. This doesn't really come as a surprise, because historically, UAE and Iran have had a rivalry. There's a lot of islands in the Persian Gulf. Heading towards the Strait of Hormuz, you get Abu Musa as an island. Historically, pirates used to use the island of Abu Musa as a stronghold. There's a lot of islands along there. And in the Emirates' eyes, Iran occupied them. In Iran's eyes, they're like, oh, they're part of Iran. But Emirates are like, no, those islands, actually, we claim them, and the Iranians invaded, and they're administering them, and they should give them back. So there's historic tension between the Emirates, especially the Emirate of Sharjah and Iran. So it doesn't surprise me that UAE side with the US over there. And again, UAE has a huge expat population, many of them from America. So they're looking out for American interests. And I feel that the UAE know that their interests are more with the West than they are with the rest of the larger Middle East. Certainly when I was in the Emirates, it was very westernized, it was very liberal. That's only increased as time's gone on. So I feel that UAE sees itself now more as a westernized kind of nation as opposed to a Islamic theocracy, which it's not. UAE is not an Islamic theocracy. Problem is, none of these countries would dare to. A boots on the ground approach, it would be up to US, and I don't think they have the stomach for another Afghanistan. Well, exactly. Like I was saying with the UAE, that they've said that they want to be defensive. So they'll only respond if Iran attacks UAE interests or American interests in the UAE. They're not going to. You would never see the UAE go into Iran. I don't even think the UAE actually have the military capabilities of doing that, to be honest. And of course, you think Emirates, the way it is at the moment, all these horrible eyesore skyscrapers. If I was in Iran and the UAE attacked me, I'd look at these horrible skyscrapers, these horrible hotels, and be like, you know what? You've got so many targets I can attack. And what we mentioned earlier as well about these Iranian missiles, these Shahabs and Fatahs, they can easily hit the Emirates. They're within striking distance of the Emirates. And even though those missiles are very inaccurate, if you just send a whole cluster load all over in random different directions, but towards the Emirates, it's inevitable some of them are going to land on these giant hotels. Dubai's tourist industry will be ruined. And like we saw, Lebanon, go back to Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a place people used to go on holiday. Lebanon had civil war. It's never recovered. Afghan used to be a popular trail on the hippie trail. Taliban took over. Afghans never recovered. Even Iran, before the Iranian Revolution, people used to visit Iran. Iran used to be almost like the Middle Eastern Paris. My mum actually she was offered a job with Iran Air to go and live in Tehran. This was just before the Iranian Revolution, but she saw what was going to happen, and she was like, no, I don't want to go there. And she wouldn't have been able to go anyway, because she spent time in an Israeli kibbutz. And I don't think they would have taken it too kindly if they'd have seen that she's got an Israeli stamp in her passport. And Bahrain as well. Bahrain, US have bases in Bahrain, as we said earlier, but even Bahrain, who are actually very friendly towards Israel nowadays. I think it was last year or the year before, Bahrain actually reached out to Israel and said, look, we want diplomatic relations with you. Bahrain is very liberal. Bahrain is very westernized again. Like I said, I plan to one day hopefully move to Bahrain, career-wise. But same problem they have as Dubai. You know, they've got this very rich infrastructure. They've got these big glitz and glam kind of buildings. They know that they're going to be a big sitting duck, which the Ayatollahs and the IRGC will just launch. Even though a lot of these targets Bahrain has are not military targets, I wouldn't put it by the IRGC to just target them purely out of spite. I'd say Lebanon has sort of recovered. In a way, I mean, it hasn't recovered to the degree that it once used to be, but it's a bit like Vietnam, I suppose. You know, Vietnam's made something really big of itself, and it had one of the most atrocious wars in living memory. But I'd say, like, going slightly off topic, I'd say that Lebanon needs to make firm peace with Israel, work with Israel. A lot of people in Lebanon are Christian. Lebanon, again, a bit like Jordan, it's a liberal country, and I don't think people realize how liberal Lebanon really is. It's just when you get these whack jobs that get in power, people like Hezbollah, and that is why Iran wants Hezbollah in Lebanon, so it can create chaos in that region. It doesn't want peace. Iran doesn't want peace in Lebanon, or peace between Lebanon and Israel. It doesn't. It wants that dissonance, and it knows that if Hezbollah wasn't in Lebanon, there's a very real possibility that Lebanon could make peace with Israel. Israel will work and trade with Lebanon. It will help them build up Lebanon into almost like a new Israel in terms of like infrastructure and outlook and culture and so on and so forth. And I believe that hopefully that will happen one day. And I'm not, when I say hopefully, I'm not saying that I want Israel to expand imperialistically, but I'm hoping that Lebanon could become what it could very well have potential to be. Yeah, never let Israel stamp your passport, even though that and prefer because I've been from England to Scotland. Yeah, no, I've always said if ever I was going to Israel, I'd apply for a separate passport so it doesn't get prejudiced. Which will bring me into a conversation for a later video, actually, Israel. Yeah, that's martial arts stuff. A lot of things are happening martial arts wise under the surface, but I'll talk about that another time. Other country, the final country which has joined this alliance, and again, this could well have changed again. I foresee there will be more countries that will actually join this US alliance. UK, where are you? We know what you're doing. But this other country, which I think it was like a couple of days ago, I didn't see it coming. Azerbaijan. Now, again, another Muslim country. Azerbaijan is just north of Iran. It's in the Caucasus Mountains. Azerbaijan used to be part of the Persian Empire. As a matter of fact, it wasn't just part of the Persian Empire, it was actually part of Persia, geographically. And Azerbaijan now see it in their interests to actually stand up against the IRGC. We know Azerbaijan has a lot of oil, it's a very rich country. Azerbaijan is a dictatorship, and there is a lot of oppression that the Azerbaijanis and the Azerbaijani government is doing against the neighboring Armenians and persecuting Christian communities in Azerbaijan. So you could look at that from the ethical perspective and be like, okay, do we really want to have a tyrannical regime on our side? Stand where you will with your ethics on that. But it just kind of goes to show that actually that's a country that probably has closer ties to Iran and the IRGC, is actually now historically and culturally anyway, is now actually going against its own former country. It's like a county in England, I don't know, if like Nottinghamshire broke away from the rest of England and wants to go to war with the rest of England, that'd be a little bit weird. So maybe a lot of Iranians are looking at the Azerbaijanis and going, oh, you freak Iranians are protesting and being traitors to Mother Iran. Whether or not Azerbaijan actually has any military hardware to make much of a difference is, at this stage, I honestly don't know. I don't know that much about Azerbaijan, but I feel that's quite a cultural statement. When you have a country which was once part of your country going against the former country, I believe that puts off a bit of a statement. Ben, I saw your question actually there. I believe that's a good question. How would you go about overthrowing the Ayatollah? Well, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei apparently is in a bunker, and nobody knows where he is. And that's for speculation, because a lot of people are, again, on social media, saying stuff like, yeah, we know where he is, and you get these news correspondents. I actually went on to BBC to find out more about where he is, where Ali Khamenei is, and I ass canned myself for looking at BBC as a reference, because BBC is just fucking awful. But nobody knows where he is. And of course, when dictators do this kind of stuff, when dictators go missing, all sorts of rumors come out and counter rumors. Part of it is power play and politics to kind of throw people off the scent. Part of it is just simply rumor. Some of it is just fantasy. But by all accounts, he is in a bunker. And by all accounts, apparently he has got plans to flee to Moscow if the IRGC were to fall. That's about as much fact as anybody knows. But where he is he in Iran? Again, speculation. I personally believe he is in Iran. I don't feel as though he's fled yet. Yet that could change. I feel that if the USS Abraham Lincoln was to appear and start launching missiles at Iran, and then realizing how weak militaristically Iran are, then that would be his cue to say, you know what, phone up Moscow. Hey, Putin, you know that favor I did you a few years ago? It's time to pay me back. Ugh, after a Moretti, Red Stripe tastes like piss. That's why I drink non-alcoholic. I really got into non-alcoholic Guinness, actually. I can't believe the amount of non-alcoholic stuff I've been drinking recently. It's like, actually, it just tastes like beer, but it doesn't leave me all over the place. The last thing, actually, I'd like to discuss or explore on this live stream, actually, about the ongoing tensions in the Gulf region. Interesting development, and I only became aware of this like last night, and that's actually that the IRGC has been designated formally as a terrorist organization. And I was like, yes, this is like so long overdue. Him and Assad can share a yeah, with Kim Jong-un there as well. Oh, all the freaks of the world. So how did you oppress your country? I blacked out the internet. Oh, that's nothing. What did you do? Oh, I created this cult personality all about myself. Oh, you guys don't know how to run a dictatorship. What did I do? I killed people. Yeah. Weirdos all over. So, yeah, IRGC has been designated a terrorist organization. That is long overdue. I feel that with everything the IRGC has done, and of course, world governments know what the IRGC has done, that they deal with these diplomats, they deal with these representatives like on a weekly basis. So they go to visit these countries and what have you. And I'm sure like the British diplomat or ambassador in Iran, I'm not even quite sure if we even still have an embassy there anymore, but Western countries who have embassies in Iran will know, they will see what is going on. They'll see how despotic the regime is. And of course, they're going to send like information back home to their home country saying like, yeah, Iran's a pretty shit place in terms of like government-wise. So they must have known that the IRGC were bad boys. And it's only taken them up until now, January 2026, to designate them as a terrorist organization. The countries that have designated IRGC as a terrorist organization, it says the EU, but not all EU countries designated IRGC as a terrorist organization. France, only I believe it's as of today, France and Spain. They've either, France as of today have designated IRGC as a terrorist organization. Spain, I again, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they have, but they've made noises saying that they are considering labeling the IRGC as a terrorist organization. All the other EU countries have labeled IRGC as a terrorist organization. USA has labeled them a terrorist organization. Canada, Australia, Saudi Arabia. It doesn't surprise me with Saudi Arabia at all, because Saudi and Iran have a historical tension with each other. And Bahrain, as we mentioned earlier as well. Bahrain's history of the IRGC is strange, because whereas the IRGC have influenced Qatar and infiltrated Qatar, and a lot of Qatar is funded by IRGC money, the IRGC tried doing the same with Bahrain. Now, Bahrain's a little island. It's very, very close to Qatar. It's like the next one along. But Bahrain, again, has a very big expat community. It's a very modern, liberal country. It's very Western in its thinking. And Bahrain, like the Emirates, realized that actually their interests were best with the West. And Bahrain were like, no, if we let IRGC influence Bahrain, we will lose all of our Western investment. We'd lose the expats. We'd lose the money. So Bahrain actually said to IRGC, no, fuck off. We don't want you here. And the IRGC were trying to use the excuse that the majority of Iranians are Shia, and the ruling family of Bahrain are Shia Muslims. So they thought, we've got this common interest, so how about we be like big brother to you? And Bahrain were like, no, go away. And good for Bahrain. You know, I'm really glad they did that. Interesting country which hasn't yet labeled the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Have a guess. Shouldn't come as a surprise. It doesn't surprise me anymore. Nothing surprises me about, yes, UK. That's what I say. It just doesn't surprise me anymore. UK, the country which, one of many countries which recognized Palestine. Okay, yeah, I mean, we've spoken about this before. I mean, I feel that Palestine can and should it be another country? Can there be a two-state solution? Yes, I believe that should come about. It's going to take a lot of managing and a lot of hard work to get that right. But for the UK to just go on a whim and say, oh, you know what, Hamas have attacked Israel, the basic of the situation, Hamas have attacked Israel, so we're going to reward Hamas by recognizing Palestine. IRGC been doing what they've been doing for decades, and the UK are just like, nah, they're not a terrorist group, when they quite blatantly are. But as I said, that's Keir Starmer. And it's kind of sad as well, thinking like a lot of these countries can see the IRGC for what they are. USA, Jordan, Emirates, Israel, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Australia, the EU, of all people. All these people, Iranians themselves, seeing the IRGC as terrorists. And yet the UK is suspiciously silent. And in this kind of situation as well, silence is deafening. Makes you wonder. Well, it certainly makes me wonder. Anyway, I feel that is all we can cover for the time being, the situation in Iran. Like I said, as soon as I go off this live stream, I'm going to go get my dinner. I'm going to sit down in front of the TV and see what else is happening with Iran. I'm surprised at how deep it's really affected me quite emotionally, learning about Iran, learning about what's going on as well. But for all I know, things could have changed again. I could turn on the TV and, I don't know, USS Abraham has appeared somewhere, or Ali Khamenei has it's been confirmed he's gone to North Korea, or he's gone to Russia, or maybe he's made peace with the Americans. I don't know. Maybe the revolutionaries, the protesters have overthrown the IRGC, and it's the start of a new day tomorrow. Who knows? You fancy talking the state of America for a bit? Yeah, absolutely fine. What would you like to talk about? The floor is yours, Ben. But first, I need a gulp. Meow. Are you, when you say state of America, are you talking about what's happening in Minnesota? Because I've been watching a little bit of what's going on in Minnesota as well. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's not funny stuff. None of the stuff that we're talking about recently on this channel is funny stuff. This is becoming a whole like political channel. Gemini politics then. Fuck the martial arts. That's so 2025. Whole ICE situation. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, what's your whole take on the whole ICE situation? The last I heard, I mean, I've been keeping an eye on it. What's happening in Minnesota, and from what I understand in Minnesota, actually no. The thing I saw in Minnesota, there were protests and riots going on in Minnesota, and there was a protester who got shot by, I think it was members of ICE, and that instance of protests, even the rioters, even more. They were like, I'm choosing my words carefully here, but the people at the protests and riots were then like, no, this is bad. ICE have just shot somebody, defund ICE. I think actually what ICE were trying to do, this guy who they shot had been known to them for a while. When they apprehended him that day, he had a firearm and they were trying to take the firearm off him. He was refusing. They scuffled onto the floor. He was still wasn't complying and he was still like resisting with a firearm in his hand, which could have gone off. So the ICE officers shot him. That can be said as being self-defense. And again, I'm not advocating death to anybody or people being killed. But in that situation, who's to say this guy wouldn't have then started really panicking and then popping off and shooting the ICE officers? You know, they were doing what they were legally and lawfully being paid to do. And it's not like they just shot him from a distance. They actually went up and actually said, look, you're wanted. Please come with us. And then this guy started refusing and resisting. The opportunity was there. I did see something actually. I don't know if it was a joke, but somebody, or like a new media channel, they're saying like they're trying to get like an English version of ICE or an English version of the FBI. Yeah, exactly. As an Englishman, I can't comprehend taking a loaded weapon to a situation like that. Well, that begs the question as well. So why would somebody feel the need to go out into the street with a gun? And people could say, you know, okay, it's for self-defense. But it could just as easily be perceived as you wanting to do harm. I mean, you and I, we don't go into the street and take knives, kitchen knives out and say, oh, I'm just going to go down the street to the supermarket and I'm going to take my kitchen knife with me just in case I get jumped. Especially as a practitioner of martial arts, you need to hold yourself to a standard. Some of the best self-defense is being able to risk assess a situation. For instance, if down the road there's a whole load of riots going on and I know ICE are involved, am I really going to walk into that situation knowing there's a possibility I could get hurt, whether intentionally or otherwise? But the best self-defense in that situation is to not be involved. The best self-defense is to not even be there. Because if you're not there, guess what? You're not going to get hurt. And a lot of people, again, they can say, oh, it's a real pussy kind of thing to say. But it's true. I'd rather be called a pussy and go to bed with all my limbs intact, as opposed to try to be Mr. Hardman, go there and get shot, which is what happened to this guy. That's just a classic example. And of course, as well, if you are going to be walking around in areas which are quite politically inflamed anyway, or there's riots going on and riot police are coming out, and the riot police or law enforcement approach you and they find you've got a weapon on you, what do you think they're going to feel about that? They're going to be like, well, there's this big civil disobedience going on, you're here with a firearm, they're not going to think, oh, you're here for self-defense. They're going to be, your best self-defense is not even be there, as we said. They're going to look at you and think, well, you've come to this place, you knew this was going on, to be right, you've come here with a firearm. I'm going to make an educated guess and say that you want to inflame the situation. The best self-defense is not being there. Yeah, exactly. And again, if you go to a situation where you feel uncomfortable, you feel the mood, you risk assess that mood and be like, you know what, I can feel the tension in the crowd. I can see more police coming. I can see the police are now getting geared up into their riot stuff. I'm not liking where this is going, so I'm going to take myself away. Make an excuse and leave. But yeah, don't walk around with like, weapons on you. It's not worth it. It's really not, you know. A lot of my fellow boxers said, why would I want to be at the pub when I need to get up to 5 a.m. for a run? I don't even go to pubs. The last time, I think, actually, I don't even remember the last time I went to a pub. I really don't. But thing is like, one, we could talk about the economics as well. I mean, going to a pub is actually very, very expensive. But also, I think, just the older you get, you just look and think, why do I want to be surrounded by potentially volatile situations? The problem in Minnesota is that the local police are refusing to back ICE agents. Minnesota, from what I understand, God, I miss. You know, don't get me wrong. When I was a youngster, I was forever in pubs. I could down so much booze and go for the 5 a.m. run and go for work. Yeah, and it didn't affect me. It really did not affect me at all. But people grow up. You know, I've still got the mental capacity of a 16-year-old, but you know, it just doesn't have the same sort of thing for me. I have to really be in the mood to kind of like go to the pub and what have you. But yeah, from what I understand about Minnesota, it's a very, very left-wing state, and I think a lot of Somalis. And again, I don't want to sound as though I'm targeting any specific group in particular, but a lot of Somalis actually do go to Minnesota. I don't feel as though Minnesota as well has got a lot of like money in there. It's not a very affluent state, so a lot of it is going to be very run down as well. Hence, crimes of opportunity are going to present themselves, and civil disobedience and what have you. But Minnesota, being Democrat, they look at things very differently, to put it that way. And I'm not advocating for Republicans or republicanism, but at least, you know, in Republican states, they tend to look out for themselves, and they're kind of like, well, if we're not happy with this, then leave, or we're going to get you out. Whereas places like Minnesota are more, no, come on in, be all inclusive. I could be wrong, but I feel it's like the woke capital of America, which would explain quite a bit, which would explain why they look at life in a certain way, or they look at social situations in a very different way to, say, how Texas would look at it, or any of the other more Republican states. That's Portland. Okay, that's my bad, my mistake. I had a friend once from Connecticut, and that's a Democrat state, but even Connecticut is very sort of like hillbilly-ish. I saw a photo of her once. She was like at a family BBQ in her garden. She had like a shotgun over her shoulder, and I remember questioning her about it. I was like, why have you got a shotgun at a family barbecue? And she was just like, it's just something we do. And that's Connecticut, you know, which is like really close to New York. So quite left-wing, quite liberal-minded, kind of socialist kind of area. If it had been, say, like a more Republican place, I don't know, Alabama, Arkansas, place like that, I maybe would have not been as surprised. thing with the United States, I think it's like every single state is almost like its own individual country. So when you look at the United States, you don't look at one country. You just look at, say, oh, this is like a collection of all these 51 or 52, however many states there are. Each different state is a different country. And sure, you get the culture of, say, Louisiana is going to be a very different culture to, say, California, which in turn is going to be a very different culture to, say, Kentucky and Minnesota and Vermont. But Vermont is so small, I don't even know if Vermont even has its... What is Vermont even famous for? As a matter of fact, let me Google that. What the hell happened to my phone? Ooh. What is... Oh. No, what's going on now? What's going on to the Iranian Air Force? See, I was trying to do this research on my phone about Iran and stuff like that before the live stream. What is Vermont famous for? Dairy products. Is it? Cheese. I thought that was Iowa. Iowa was like really famous for cheese. Where's Rob when you need him? Yeah, fuck Rob. He hasn't been to a live stream in ages. You need to have words with him. Bastard. Anyway, just kidding, Rob. If you see this at a later date, he probably won't, but he knows I'm kidding. Okay, 5 interesting facts about... Turned itself off. 5 interesting facts about Vermont. Vermont was once an independent country. I didn't know that. Vermont is the birthplace of 2 US presidents. Vermont is a major producer of milk and maple syrup. Yeah, dairy products. Vermont is the #1 producer of marble in the United States. Wow. Why is the crime rate so low in Vermont? Vermont just doesn't have that many people. Let's read about Minnesota. Knew it. What is Minnesota like to live in? Living in Minnesota means experiencing 4 distinct seasons, embracing an outdoor lifestyle centered around lakes and parks, enjoying a strong job market with good schools, and encountering friendly but reserved Minnesota nice culture. What about the lower cost of living, higher taxes? Okay, overall vibe, it's a place for a balanced, slower paced, settled life, not a constant party scene with a strong sense of community and appreciation for nature. Okay, well, I have to be honest, I've not been to Minnesota, so that I'm going to have to take that at face value. But I may do some research about Minnesota and just see like the ins and outs, the pros and cons of Minnesota and its general outlook and general culture on life. Well, with that being said, Ben, I am going to skedaddle now, actually, because it's past my bedtime and I've got school tomorrow. And by bedtime, I mean dinner. And by school, I mean, well, preschool. I mean, just look at me. You know I still go to school. Fuck. I'll find out what cool things Minnesota's famous for. Fargo. Yes, you said Fargo. Is it famous for Fargo, Ben? What's Minnesota famous for? Without looking at your phone. Okay, it's famous for Fargo. That being said, yeah, I must get some dinner. Ben, thank you for joining. It's been cool. It's actually been nice to have a catch up as well. Actually, it's been quite a while. Besides just sending like silly WhatsApp memes and don't ever apologize. Seriously. But yeah, we'll be in touch. No worries. Good to see you. You too. Take care, my friend. Stay safe, train hard, and keep learning about Iran because it's a cool place when you get rid of the IRGC. Take care, Ben. See you later.